name's James Landis, and my topic is Going to the Western Sea, Lewis, Clark, and the Corps of Discovery. I am Mary Weather Lewis, President Jefferson's secretary. On June 20th, 1803, President Jefferson sent me a letter commissioning the first expedition of any president and asking me to lead it. The letter stated, "The object of your mission is to explore the Missouri River and such principal stream of it as by its course and communication with the waters of the Pacific Ocean may offer the most direct and practical communication across this continent for the purposes of commerce." As for the people living in the West, Jefferson wanted us to acquire what knowledge you can about the state of morality, religion, and information among them, as it may better enable those who may endeavor to civilize or instruct them. Jefferson wanted us to report on and explore the soil and face of the country, its growth and vegetable productions, especially those not known in the U.S., the animals of the country generally, and especially those not in the U.S. The knowledge we could obtain from this would be a turning point for America. I gladly accepted and sent a letter to my good friend, William Clark, asking him to co-captain the Corps of Discovery. Clark responded, "My friend, I can assure you that no man lives with whom I would prefer to undertake and share the difficulties of such a trip than yourself. My friend, I join you with hand and heart." We were given a map to start out that had only 3 points making on it: St. Louis, the mainland villages, and the mouth of the Columbia River. On May 14, 1804, we left Camp Wood west of St. Louis and started up the Missouri River, fighting the sandbars and mosquitoes. President Jefferson had emphasized the importance of keeping journals. He said that several copies of these, as well as your other notes, should be made at leisure times and put into the care of the most trustworthy of your attendants. We followed his instructions, recording details of even the most dreary of days. The best are the days of discovery. On September 7th, 1804, we arrived at a spot nearly 4 acres in extent and covered with small holes to the residences of small animals that were like barking squirrels. We tried to capture one alive. We approached them, and they fled to the safety of their holes. We had to bring up 5 barrels of water in kettles to be able to finally flush one of these creatures out. We are now able to send the first barking squirrel, or prairie dog, back east to be studied, but for now it will be caged away. While journeying through the plains, we hunted for food. The wildlife we saw was astonishing. I do not exaggerate when I estimate the buffalo to amount to 3,000 in a single herd. We mapped our route using dead reckoning by judging how fast we were going and how much time it took. By late October 1804, we arrived at the Mandan Indian villages. We built Fort Mandan and stopped for the winter. We hired a French fur trader named Charbonneau and his Indian wife, Sacagawea, as translators and guides. Sacagawea was about 16 years old and pregnant. The winter was cold, sometimes reaching 45 degrees below zero. We added our measurements and what the Mandans knew about the country that lay ahead to the map, and on April 7th, 1805, sent a map and many specimens, including the barking squirrel, back east with 15 men and 4 of the Mandans. The other 34 of us, including Sacagawea's baby, Pumpkin, started upriver. The Mandans told us about animals that we may encounter, including bears that to kill, you must have groups of 6 or more, and you would likely have a loss of 1 or more in your party. This did not sound like any bear we had in the east. So when Hunter and I saw 2 bears, we both fired and wounded different ones. One escaped, the other turned upon me and pursued me, but could not stop me from reloading my gun, which I again aimed at him, and a 3rd shot from the hunter brought him down. We estimated its weight at 300 pounds, and it wasn't even half grown. I understand that these are now called grizzly bears. Sacagawea's importance as a guide grew. She was from the Shoshone tribe, but had been stolen from them and sold to Charbonneau by another tribe, the Dotson. She was beginning to recognize some of the area and could only imagine who she might see again. The land was changing. We saw mountains in the distance and knew we would need horses to cross them, so we went searching for the Shoshones on land. am Kamioi, chief of the Shoshone Indian tribe. One day, an older tribal woman who was out collecting roots came back bringing white-skinned people. I had 60 warriors line up in front of camp, but when the white people came, they all laid down their guns. I welcomed them into camp, and they said they had others that wanted to speak with us. Eventually, one black-skinned and other white-skinned people came. We began to speak through interpreters. Suddenly, the translator ran over to me and hugged me. It was Sacagawea. They had brought back my sister. I was so happy. Since they said they would try to supply us with guns later, they got their horses. They wanted to continue downriver, but I told them it was not possible, as the river got too narrow. They checked, and after I helped them to map a route over the Bitterroot Mountains, and gave them one of my people, Old Toby, to guide them. It was hard traveling through and mapping the Bitterroot Mountains. We could only see a certain distance with all the snow and mountains blocking sight. Throughout this, we have tried to keep accurate measure of how far we have come, but it's nearly impossible to do. Upon exiting the Bitterroot Mountains, we started up the Clearwater River, with the current at our backs. Along the river, we met up with a new Indian tribe. They flattened the foreheads of their children between two wooden planks as a sign of beauty. We called them the Flathead Indians, and after recording this in our journals, quickly headed to the Pacific to hopefully reach it before the winter did. On November 18th, 1805, we reached our goal. We beheld with astonishment the waves dashing against the rocks in this immense ocean. We are now able to complete a map from St. Louis to the Pacific Ocean. We had a vote of where to stay for the Pacific, including Sacagawea and Clark's slave, York. We voted to stay by the Pacific and build Fort Clatsop, and then return to President Jefferson with our findings in the spring of 1806. Our successful expedition represented many turning points in history. While we did not find a water route to the Pacific, the accurate mapping of a route to it was a turning point for American exploration and commerce. With the purchase of the Louisiana Territory in 1803, the size of our country had doubled. Our expedition opened a gateway to the West. During our 2.5-year journey, we mapped 4,135 miles and were only off by 40 miles. This transformed America's knowledge of the West, leading to the decline of other countries' claims to the continental U.S. Our expedition was also a scientific turning point. We drew and described 122 animals new to science. We collected samples and seeds of 178 new kinds of plants. Our samples, drawings, seeds, and notes advanced scientific knowledge beyond belief. The historic vote to build Fort Clatsop was far ahead of its time. While York and Sacagawea were given the opportunity to vote in 1805, black men earned the right to vote in 1870, women in 1920, and Indians, along with their citizenship, in 1924. The expedition was a turning point for the relations with the Indians of the West. The Corps encountered 84 tribes, and all but a few of the meetings were peaceful. After the expedition, some Indian tribal leaders even went to visit their new great father, President Jefferson. Sadly, it was also a turning point for some native animals and many native Indians of the West. By 1889, buffalo had been hunted to near extinction, and many native Indian tribes forced off their native lands to reservations. We had gone to the Western Sea and brought back with us knowledge that would help shape the future of our country. And that, Pompey, is how we went to the Western Sea.